because we have a political system which is dysfunctional, which is controlled and owned by corporations, whether they're the too big to fail banks or the insurance companies or the pharmaceutical industry. And so rethinking the dollar means rethinking our whole approach to economics. Are we going to start with the idea of human dignity and human development as the purpose of our nation, or get rich quick schemes in a casino economy?
Thanks for plugging in and Rethinking the Dollar. I'm excited to have my guest, Mr. Harley Schlanger, the national spokesman for LaRouchePac, sit down with us today to discuss the global monetary system, as well as give us his take on the dollar. I'm sure you're going to find this to be very educational as well as informative. Click the subscribe button below for more RTD interviews as well as monetary news updates. Enjoy this conversation.
Welcome to Rethinking the Dollar. Today I'm excited to have my guest, Mr. Harley Schlanger. He's the historian as well as national spokesman for the LaRouchePac, a political action committee founded by Lyndon LaRouche. And today he's going to discuss the global economy as well as our monetary system and events happening worldwide. Harley, welcome to Rethinking the Dollar.
Well, thanks for having me, Mike. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Well, I came across one of your recent video commentary interviews, and you said a couple things that really stood out to me, and it was all in regards to the future and our monetary system. Wanted to get a little bit more of your bio information. Give us the audience a little bit of information about LaRouchePac and how you got involved with that, and exactly what is the LaRouchePac.
Well, Lyndon LaRouche is known, at least in name, to a lot of people, but he's known largely, he's been defined by his enemies who call him left-wing, right-wing, cult leader, anti-Semite, Nazi, communist, but they don't want to deal with the issues he's raising. And I think the best way to understand LaRouche is he is an American system economist who believes in physical economy, that when you address the question of economics, you're talking about people's lives today and in the future. You're not talking about how to get rich. Now, many people have been won over by what is called the idolatry of money, the worship of money, the how do I get rich, how do I get more goods? Mm-hmm. And we have a consumer economy that's run amok. So what Mr. LaRouche has been concerned with for years, going back to 1971, and I appreciate your desire to rethink the dollar, because the dollar was fundamentally changed on August 15th, 1971, when Richard Nixon acted to end the Bretton Woods system, which was the post-World War II system set up by Franklin Roosevelt, with fixed exchange rates. When he got rid of a connection to gold as a gold reserve, which happened in 1971, and opened the door for what are called floating exchange rates, they turned the currencies into commodities for speculation. And we've had a downward trend since 1971 around the world in terms of physical production. Now, we've seen interesting anomalies, such as the rise of China, Russia as a strategic potential partner or adversary. But what Mr. LaRouche has been concerned about is to use the best tradition of the American system to help other countries develop, and to do that in conjunction with physical economic growth, science and technology, and not worry so much about currencies, because currencies can come and go. They're manipulated now by speculators, not by national economies. Right. And so, and we're also, just to finish the point, we're not in favor of a gold standard, because that limits credit capability, and you need credit. Now, my personal, I've been with Mr. LaRouche since 1972. I've had an opportunity through that association to run for office, to work with candidates, to provide an intelligence function. I've traveled extensively in Mexico and in Europe, where I've been involved in meetings and discussions, and I help recruit a whole new generation of young people to the LaRouche movement. And so my concern, as you expressed to me earlier, is what are we telling the young people when we're saying you can make $1 billion in speculation on Facebook, and that's your future, when you realize, what does Facebook produce? Right. And so that's I think, the background of Mr. LaRouche and myself.
Okay, fair enough. Now, typically I start off by asking questions of, what comes to mind when you think of, or when you hear the words rethinking the dollar? What was the very first thing that came to your mind when you saw those three words?
Well, as I mentioned to you, the dollar has changed dramatically from what we had in the early part of my life up to 1971 to what we have today. I think rethinking a financial system that serves the purposes of physical production. If we do that, the dollar will be fine. But that's a big step because we have a political system which is dysfunctional, which is controlled and owned by corporations, whether they're the too big to fail banks or the insurance companies or the pharmaceutical industry. And so rethinking the dollar means rethinking our whole approach to economics. Are we going to start with the idea of human dignity and human development as the purpose of our nation, or get rich quick schemes in a casino economy? So rethinking the dollar raises those questions with me, and I think it's a very fruitful way to look at things.
Right. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the goal in rethinking the dollar is to basically inform the millennials as well as the centennials, those who have no economic or financial background whatsoever. And so why do you think that this subject matter is the most important at this particular time in history? Or is it?
Oh, it is. We're facing a potential deadly global financial collapse, which is putting us on a course toward war. Because the people who are running the globalized economy, and I'm not talking about Barack Obama, I'm talking about City of London and Wall Street bankers, have bankrupted the world economy. They have a pile of debt that's the largest amount of total debt that we've ever had. In reality, if you had to have a margin call, you might say, on all the outstanding debt, the dollar would shrink to nothing. The value of the dollar is gone. Now, what should the value of the dollar be based on? The physical capability of the United States to produce more than we consume. That's how you also eliminate debt problems.
Mm-hmm.
Instead, we have these idiot austerity-minded Republicans running around, and I hope you don't mind if I...
Oh, no, feel free. Speak freely. Speak freely.
Who agree with the International Monetary Fund that austerity, government spending, is the biggest problem. I would say we're not spending enough. We're spending a lot of money on the wrong things, like propping up big banks. You know, people who say, oh, we're a welfare economy, it's true. We're providing money to keep brain-dead banks in business when we should be spending money on education, on physical production, infrastructure for the future. So, you know, these bring up the ironies of modern times where what people don't know is going to possibly kill them. There's 4 steps that should be taken, because we're going to have another collapse bigger than 2008 at some point in the future, unless we make changes.
Right.
Because you can't sustain an economy based on quantitative easing. You're just increasing the liquidity in a system while decreasing the solvency. And the problem we have is insolvency. We have financial obligations that can never be met.
Right.
And just as an example, Citibank has $171 trillion of derivative obligations on its books. You realize that's 10 times larger than the GDP of the United States. A bad derivatives bet, and what do? Bail it out by taking money from everybody? So we're in terrible shape, but there are measures that can be used to solve it. Glass-Steagall, which would be the reseparation of commercial banks and financial institutions. This is a bill from Franklin Roosevelt's time, 1933, until 1999, where we had no banking crises. Once it was repealed, it opened the door for speculators. Secondly, we need credit to go to those commercial banks that are protected from speculators to create jobs. And then we need infrastructure, major spending on real infrastructure, and then science and technology for the future. So those are 4 steps we could take to get out of the crisis. But right now, we don't have a political class inclined to do any of that. And as you point out, most of the discussion of economics is, to put it in the proper vernacular, it's crap. It's people who haven't learned that something that didn't work before is not going to work in the future. Quantitative easing will never provide us an ability to have a productive economy.
Right, I do agree. Now let's talk about what's happening in Washington now with this budget. I know we're a day away from, the kind of the deadline before things are supposedly unraveling. And I read earlier that they're trying to pass some temporary type of things to get it through to December. What's your take on that, as well as John Boehner stepping down? Is there any coincidence there, or What's your thoughts about the whole budget aspect that's happening right now as we speak?
Well, as I said, I think the budget is a secondary issue, but it's made a primary issue because they want to divert people away from the real problem. Why do we have growing debt? Because we're not employing people productively. And so the real question is not the budget. I think we need to spend more in areas that will produce wealth in the future. So the whole debate is a distorted debate. It's a pure accounting mechanism. The debt's growing, so we have to cut the debt. Well, there's different kinds of debt. We went into debt to create this country, but we were able to pay it off because we rebuilt our economy, or we built an economy.
Yeah.
So I think much of what we hear on the budget debate is a fraud. Now, shutting down the government is also a stunt. What happens is they close down the Washington Monument and a few things, and then the Republicans say, see, we survived the government shutdown, so we don't need the government. And the Democrats say, oh, we need the government. It's all an accounting fraud.
Right.
The real issue is, are we going to have a budget which reflects the needs of the future? Or are we going to be held hostage to this push and pull of more spending, more government versus no government, no spending?
All right. Now, what about some of our programs that may apparently be shut down, as far as the assistance for food, and as well as the military things like that, payroll? Are all those things in jeopardy if if the government does shut down, or will they still be funded regardless?
Well, it depends. Last time they did start cutting military payroll, and it puts an enormous burden on our soldiers, on our men and women in uniform. But this is again part of the game.
Yeah.
They try to put pressure on people. The reason they shut down the Washington Monument is so that people who have booked their trips to Washington months in advance come to the city and it's all shut down and there's nothing to see. So what do? They get mad at the Democrats or the Republicans.
Right.
It's fraud. It's a big game. Now, then you have Republicans who say, well, we should shut down the Department of Education. We should shut down the Department of Energy. There are a lot of things we should shut down, including the mouths of a lot of these ignorant Republicans. But I hate to say it, even though I'm a Democrat, I don't see anything better coming from the Democratic Party.
Yeah.
So we can use these things as what they call learning moments. What budget should be about is ensuring that we're going to have a future that will be better. And this is what Alexander Hamilton, who was really the founder of the American economic system, said: never take on a debt without the means to extinguish it. Now, you don't take the first part where he said never take on a debt and leave it at that. You need to have debts because you have to spend on things in areas where you don't know whether you're going to get a profit or not. But you use your best judgment. And if you listen to most of the budget debate, it's so infantile, and it fits into this political narrative of austerity versus too much spending. And we need a different metric of thinking: productivity, production, and so on.
All right. Now, do you foresee the type of production capacity returning back to the United States, being that everything's pretty much shipped overseas, and as well as our debt, with all our liability, our national debt, as well as unfunded liabilities? I mean, do you ever see there being a way to pay off or pay down, or to keep this thing afloat, being that we are in so much debt?
I don't want to keep it afloat.
Yeah.
The debt is largely owed by Wall Street to Wall Street, by the City of London to the City of London, and we're the ones paying. When they make these trades, they stick it to their clients. The clients lose, but they make money on the trades. The classic example of, I think it was Bank of America, that was issuing mortgage-backed securities on properties that they knew were going into foreclosure. That's fraud.
Wow.
Much of the debt was fraudulently built up. So, unless you do something about it, you're just continuing the fraud until finally someday there's a margin call and you find out no one has the money to pay the debt, which is what happened in September 2008. Now, I think we can use this as an opportunity to put these banks through bankruptcy reorganization. And the way you do it is simple. You call the debt. You say, okay, you have 30-to-1 leverage, and here's your $1 of assets. We want to see your dollar of assets. And what you find is that they're sitting on top of, we're probably more like 50 or 60-to-1. And the assets are not necessarily good. If an asset is a mortgage-backed security and half the properties are foreclosed, what's it worth?
Right, not much.
So, I think we come back to something of rethinking economic theory based on the difference between a financial system that stands alone, which is what we have today,
Mm-hmm.
or a financial system which serves a physical economy.
Right.
The only way to have a strong dollar is to have a strong economy underneath it.
Right. Now, a lot of economists as well as alternative media sources mention about a global monetary reset. You mentioned restructuring the banks and things like that, calling the debts. Do you foresee them restructuring the banks, or there being some type of catastrophic event that forces everyone to wake up to the fact that we are too far in debt and that something needs to be done? Or how do you see it unraveling?
Mike, you're asking really good questions.
Well, thanks, sir.
This is exactly the issue. A monetary reset based on what? The present system? All the axioms of the present system have proven to be flawed. There's a very good economist named William White, the former chief economist of the Bank for International Settlements, who wrote a paper called False Assumptions and Unintended Consequences. And he said, that's what we're living with now. You can't continue to make the same mistakes because people are losing their lives and their future because of these bad policies. So it's not just a question of testing economic theories. These theories have failed. The so-called efficient market theory, a fraud. Supply and demand, a fraud.
Mm-hmm.
What we've been living with and debating in the universities, the Austrian school versus the neoliberal Keynesian, it's a fraud. So we've got to start over. Now, fortunately, the whole world is not caught up in the dollar casino bingo. There's something new on the horizon called the BRICS, the Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. These are countries that have resources, they have money. China has lots of money. Russia has some money, but they have no debt.
Mm-hmm.
Brazil has all kinds of raw materials. India has one of the most advanced tech sectors, although a tough problem internally. And South Africa's got gold.
Mm-hmm.
What are they talking about? They're talking about a new financial system, starting with this new development bank, which will fund infrastructure. And where are they going to fund it? In Africa, where African countries have no access to infrastructure funding because the International Monetary Fund said they don't meet standards for credit, and the World Bank won't let them get loans. Asia, where you have a large population and growing wealth, but not the capability to fund the kinds of connection, the corridors of development of high-speed rail and ports and things of that sort. So the BRICS banks are going to fund that. The U.S. says, under both Obama and Bush, no, we can't do it because you don't qualify for loans on our standards. Well, who does qualify for loans? Citibank? Merrill Lynch?
Yeah.
Goldman Sachs? Of course they do. So this is where we need a whole rethinking of how we approach economics.
Right. Now, with everything shifting, I guess the next level of productivity coming from third world nations, predominantly the African continent, as you mentioned. Where will that leave the developed countries right now that's heavily submerged in debt, such as United States, a lot of Europe? How will those in say 5, 10, 12 years from now, when things begin to shift, what will the economies look like, for example, back here, as far as the day-to-day prices at the grocery store, the retirement system, Wall Street, and so what will those things look like as things leave and head into those countries where they're looking to really begin developing now?
Well, if we leave Wall Street in charge, we're going to have a collapse, and then we're going to be dependent on other countries trying to help us. That's where we're headed. If we change our policies and say we want to cooperate, we want to collaborate with the BRICS, we want American firms to be able to bid to participate in the rail systems that are being built, the power systems. See, we still have a capability in this country. We're losing it. But that capability was once called the arsenal of democracy. It was what we had in Detroit, where you had machine tool operatives who could, whether they built cars or tanks or tractors or power generators, it didn't matter. They had the capability to do it. When you lose that, you become dependent on other countries for the technology you need to produce your livelihood. We're shutting down our family farms in this country. We're becoming dependent on free trade food from other countries who don't have the same standards in production that we have.
Mm-hmm.
So we're becoming increasingly a debtor nation with no capability to work our way out of it. What Mr. LaRouche has proposed is that we take some reforms in the financial system against speculation, back toward production, and then go to the rest of the world and say, we have capabilities, we want to help you, we want to participate. Now, this is what Franklin Roosevelt intended with the Bretton Woods system in 1944, that the common aims of mankind should be what drives the U.S. economy. Not that we just want to give everything away, but look, we had an obligation to end colonialism in Africa. And we did very little to help with that until when Kennedy came in, we started doing a little bit, but then what happened with the end of colonialism? A new form of colonialism, a financial imperialism took over.
Right.
So instead of taking human bodies as slaves, we continued to extract the raw materials. And what do we provide the Africans with? Guns to kill each other.
Yeah.
So this idea of shifting toward a human economy is what is necessary. If we don't do it, I mean, what happens if there's a crash? Well, what happens if your ATM card doesn't work and your credit cards don't work and you try to go down to the local 7-Eleven to buy a sandwich and there are people with guns trying to steal the few loaves of bread left on the shelf? What happens when suppliers can't get credit to provide the goods that people expect? We have an armed country of a lot of crazy people.
Right.
You could have chaos unleashed very, very quickly. And so this is what would happen if we have a bigger collapse than what occurred in 2008.
Right.
And I'm confident we can avoid it. But people have to stop thinking about get-rich-quick schemes and start thinking about how to build a future.
Right. And how about the idea of preserving what you've already accumulated as far as your savings and checking, things like that? How do you, when I hear the markets are manipulated on every front, so there's no real way to gauge value nowadays. So how do you maintain what you've worked for? I mean, for a young guy, family, couple kids, be hitting the workforce now, how would you recommend someone begin to, hold on to what they do have, being that everything is, haywires right now, it seems like?
When I do public addressing, a lot of times at the end, the real question someone says, what should I do with my money?
Yeah.
Or the clever people say, what do you do with your money? And I say, I don't have that much. I just put it in my wallet. If you don't have a strong currency based on something underneath it, you've got nothing. You may have a 401k portfolio that says that your wealth is going way up, it's skyrocketing. But what happened in 2008? It collapsed overnight.
Right.
It's happened to people who bought into this idea that the housing that you own will continue to appreciate. And so if you own a home, you're set for life. Next thing you know, you're in foreclosure.
Right.
So there's no security when you have a speculative system. The only ones who have security are the ones who are taking the money from you and they're putting it into property, they're putting it into overseas possessions, gold and silver. And what happens to gold? If they want, they'll come confiscate your gold.
Right.
And you have a whole section of the country that seems to believe if you have guns, beef jerky, water, and erectile dysfunction pills, you're set for life in case of a crash. That's not the way to live.
Right.
So now on pensions, this is important because the conservatives are saying, well, the money that's owed on the pensions is too much, it'll never be paid. Well, people paid into pension systems. We promised them that would be available. Look what happened in Detroit when the pensions were slashed by the bankruptcy court.
Right.
What do you say to someone who said, but I played by the rules, I worked hard, I saved money, I put it into a pension, and now you're saying I'm going to get 20 cents on the dollar in my pension? No, those are things we have to secure.
Mm-hmm.
And if to secure them, we have to take the speculative instruments and sell them down and take whatever you can get from them to pay the pensions first. That's how it should be. Now, in the post-1980s world, the pensions are the last things that are protected. The bondholders and stockholders are protected first. That's a shift away from a moral system. So what I would say to a young person is, work hard, save, but fight to make sure we have an educated population so that we have good policies. Because if we don't have a good government under our Constitution that reflects these interests for the future, you're in a crapshoot. You're living in a casino economy where the things could go bad any moment.
All right. So it sounds like, in a sense, that there's really nowhere to run, there's nowhere to hide, other than to educate yourself, in a sense.
Because people who think they can save money, put dollars in their mattress. What happens if we have hyperinflation?
Right.
That's that everyone in Germany remembers from 1923. People who say, "Don't worry, I've got gold." Well, can you eat gold?
Right.
The price of gold fell pretty precipitously in the last years.
Yeah.
So it's a manipulated market.
Yeah.
Some people store wine. Well, at least that's a way to numb your pain as you're seeing the world collapse around you. Look, our system was built on this idea that we're going to have citizens who will fight for what's good. And we can debate these things. Should we be investing in high-speed rail in the United States? Should we be investing in water management projects for the western states? I mean, I have decided views on all of these things, but we can debate them.
Right.
Then the question comes, where does the money come from? Well, where did the money come from to bail out Wall Street? $23 trillion. Where did that come from? How come we could come up with money to bail out Jamie Dimon and Lloyd Blankfein, but we couldn't come up with money to take care of a retired city worker in Detroit who was dependent on a $1,500 a month pension fund? And to get that pension fund had to sign away Social Security. So this is where you see that our moral system has been turned upside down. The people who have been writing the laws the last 30 years have favored speculators over Main Street, and we've got to go back in the other direction. If we wait until after a crash to do it, we may not be able to get the right policies because of the chaos. We really have to move now. And I applaud what you're trying to do to give people some ideas and get them thinking so that they can be active in this as opposed to just victims.
All right. Now let's talk about some things, because earlier you hinted at, that usually things kind of end with war. And as of today, it looks like Russia just finally started to engage in Syria. So they're attacking and doing some things over there. How do you think, or why is this why will this, I believe, is going to be the catalyst for something much, much greater. What are your thoughts on Russia deciding to get involved in Syria, which kind of throws a wrinkle in the Western Bloc's plans in regards to removing the Assad regime? How do you think this is going to unfold? Why is this important right now, you think?
Well, this is really important because what reflects is the failure of our so-called war on terror. Going back to Bush, this was not a war on terror. This was an attempt to establish a national security state in the United States while attacking governments that weren't going to go along with the global monetary bankers' dictatorship. We overthrew governments that may not have been prime examples of democracy like Saddam, but people lived there. They used oil money for health care and for education. Women had rights in Iraq. The Jewish and Christian communities of Iraq and Syria were protected by Saddam and Assad. Look what we did in Libya. We overthrew Gaddafi. He wasn't the greatest guy in the world, but what was he doing with oil money? Free education, health care, building modern cities. And who benefited from our intervention? The terrorists. We didn't stop, there were no Al-Qaeda in Iraq before we went in there. So you could say, well, this was really a big misguided policy. But I'll tell you what LaRouche said. This was a prelude to targeting Russia and China. Because Iraq and Syria don't threaten the international monetary system. Russia and China do. And if the international monetary system is saying austerity for the world, for the Main Street, and prop up the speculative bubble, then countries that say no are going to be targeted and attacked. I applaud what Putin is doing. Putin said, look, you want to fight ISIS? Who's fighting ISIS? The Kurds and the Syrians. So let's support them. And there aren't Russian boots on the ground. They say there are Syrian boots on the ground. Let's give them the means to do it. And Mr. Obama said, no, Assad is the cause of the refugee crisis. That's just a lie.
Right.
There were no people leaving Syria before the Civil War because there was hope for the future. It's been the effects of our funding a movement of regime change that caused the refugees, just as in Ukraine. 1 million people have left Ukraine to go to Russia because of the situation that we imposed there by bringing in a regime change. So I think regime change, and I don't know whether Obama is aware of what he's doing or not. I assume he's a smart enough man to know that he knows what he's doing. He's just wrong on everything he's doing. He's continued the Bush policies. And this is what Putin just called his bluff. And interestingly, who's backing the Russians now? The Germans. The Germans who were going along with us against Russia and Ukraine are now saying, yeah, Putin's right. Let's bring Russia into Syria. The French have their own peculiar view of it.
Right.
But we're seeing a shift in the world. Again, if we do what's right in this country, then we can be a part of that. And I'll just add one point here, because I think it's worth noting.
Mm-hmm.
I was very much in favor of impeaching Bush and Cheney for what they did with Iraq. And at that time, Pelosi, the Democratic Speaker of the House, said impeachment's not on the table. Why? Well, they figured Democrats would win in 2008, so they didn't want to disrupt it. I'm in favor of impeaching Obama for the same thing. He's violated the Constitution in these wars and his bailouts.
Mm-hmm.
But again, the Republicans are doing what the Democrats did. Both parties are dominated by the money of Wall Street. And you see people reacting to that in a somewhat silly way by supporting people like Trump and Fiorina and Carson, who, what's their benefit? They're not professional politicians.
Mm-hmm.
Their policies are the same as the professional politicians. They're just different, quirky ways of expressing it.
Right.
So we need a full political shift. And I think what Putin did, pulled the rug out from under Obama. And now people in the U.S. military are beginning to talk about how we don't have a policy to fight terrorism in Syria and Iraq. So there's a possibility to shift that also. So that's, I think my most important message to you, Mike, is that we have to rethink a lot of things.
Mm-hmm.
But if we rethink them properly, if we get to this question of what do we really want to do? Do we want a world of perpetual warfare between different religions, different races, different ethnic groups? Or do we recognize there's a common aims of mankind which depend on acting for the dignity of each human being? And in this sense, the John F. Kennedy economic policy and the moral policy of Martin Luther King pointed a way that we've turned away from.
Mm-hmm.
And we've got to get back to that policy. Science, technology, lifting people out of poverty, and recognizing that every human being deserves their dignity. And what that means is not handouts, it means an opportunity to get an education, to get a productive job, and to act for the future for their children and grandchildren.
Right.
So,
Understandable. Well, as we draw towards the end, Rethinking the Dollar is the name of this whole discussion here. Now let's talk about just lastly the world reserve status of the dollar. Where do you think, how much longer do we have? Do you think there will be a shift? I know you mentioned the BRICS earlier with the new development bank. Russia, China accumulating massive amount of gold and things like that. How do you see things unfolding with the reserve status? What will happen in the next couple of years or so, you think?
if we continue with the current policy, there will be a financial collapse, and I think countries will use that as an excuse to get out of the euro and the dollar, because the euro and the dollar are intricately connected. It's hard to predict something like this. You have some people who are saying we're going to go to the Amero or some kind of world currency based on the existing dollar system. I think what we're seeing is that we're moving into a multipolar world, no longer unipolar. You know, we've had the dollar as the reserve currency from the end of World War II. It worked well for a while. Countries did improve, but that shifted. I think the recent agreements of the ruble and the yuan to make them convertible for Russia-China trade deals is a sign we're going in a different direction. But it's not necessarily anti-American. You know, you could have what they call a market basket of commodities where you have links, but I think we have to go back to a fixed exchange rate between the major currencies so that countries can have longer-term investment policies. Will we do it? This is not based on abstract laws of economics. This is based on political decisions.
Right.
If we continue to make bad political decisions, I don't think the dollar will last through the next 2 or 3 years. If we get some, I mean, there are ways to extend that, which are not necessarily good, But I think we have an opportunity now to restore the production of the United States, to make the dollar strong, so that it can be part of a convertible mix of currencies that will fund a growth of world trade. And we can do that without free trade agreements. So that's how I would see the dollar.
Right. Well, Harley Schlanger, I appreciate you sitting down with us today to discuss your take on what's going on. How can people follow you as well as stay in tune with what you have going on?
Well, the most important place to go is LaRouchePac.com, which is LaRouchePac.com. We have all kinds of information, videos, discussions, and you can find me on various radio shows and blogs and things around the country. But I think the best place to do is to go to LaRouchePac.com. And if someone's interested in talking with me, I'll give out a toll-free number from my office here in Houston where they can give me a call. It's 800-922-2907. I do return calls, and I'm not going to sell you something. I'm going to give you an opportunity to have a discussion. So that's 800-922-2907.
All right, I'll make sure to post that below this video when I posted it to YouTube. But Harley, I appreciate you sitting down with us. It's great discussing these opportunities, these things going on with you, and look forward to staying in touch with you.
Thank you very much. I hope we can.
All right, thanks.
Well, this concludes my discussion with Harley Schlanger. Hope you found this to be very educational as well as informative. I want to encourage you to visit LaRouchePac.com for more information as well as to follow his organization. Scroll down below, leave us a comment, and also share it if you thought this was informative. Looking forward to bringing you more interviews. See you later.